was at the end of my gap year, my brother died.
Yeah.
So my life changed dramatically anyway.
Yeah.
And that led to me, when I joined university, I went to Durham about 4 months later, becoming somebody who just did everything. I threw
Yeah.
myself into everything. So I filled my days,
Yeah.
filled every hour with something, until I found, whatever it was that was going to give me that
Yeah.
buzz again.
So this is Daniel, right? So he died when you were 19.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened there?
So he was signed to be a professional footballer to Leeds United. He was about 2 months off his 16th birthday and just finishing, well, he'd be in the middle of his GCSEs. It was the end of May in 1992, and he was in the garden playing football with my dad and my other brother, who was 6 at the time, and my parents were going out for dinner that night, so I think they'd just had a kickabout before my dad went out, and he went over to pick the ball up and collapsed, and that was what it turned out to be the last breaths he would take. He had a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is a congenital heart disease, which was totally unseen. We had no physical, almost the opposite. He had no physical manifestation of it, to the point that he was an elite athlete.
Yeah.
He was incredibly fit, and lived his life for sport, and was incredibly talented, and so no suspicion of anything being wrong with his heart.
I mean, how does something like that? That's such a massive thing to come out of nowhere, and so you weren't there at the time.
I was in London, actually, because I was going to go to Durham. So I'd had a gap year, and I was based in London in that year, and received the phone call that evening after they'd rushed him to hospital. My mum thought he had sunstroke. It was a really hot day.
Yeah.
She followed behind in the ambulance, calling her family, thinking that they were all going to go in and see him, come out of sunstroke or something.
Yeah.
And she rang me and told me what had happened, which was just disbelief from the point of view of trying to comprehend it in that moment, because this was somebody who'd come to stay with me 2 months before, and we'd gone for a run around Wimbledon Common together, and he was fit and not just alive and vital, but those people that had unbelievable kind of energy for life, and he was doing the thing that he loved and he was passionate about, and he had such a bright future, and it was just impossible what she was saying just did not make sense. How does that happen? How does that happen that somebody like that can just be there 1 minute and not
go on
the next? Yeah. And that was the start, really, of everything changing in my world, our world, the family life as we knew it. You
kind of said there was life before Daniel and life after Daniel. What was the first kind of things you noticed to change, really?
Well, we'd had this very idyllic upbringing.
Yeah.
We had a great childhood. My dad was traveling around being a footballer. We'd lived in another country. We'd moved to Canada. We lived in Vancouver, which is one of the great cities in the world, and had a fantastic period of time there. We'd always been a little team because of the 3 older kids. We were only a year apart, each of us. So we'd moved schools with ease. We didn't care if we went to a new school because we had each other. And then my other brother came along a bit later, and my parents were seemingly very happy. They were quite passionate, so if they had a row, it was quite loud, but they were also very loving. They'd just been on a holiday, I think their first holiday to Thailand. They had 10 days or something in Thailand over the Easter of that, just before he died. And my mum always talks about, they received the phone call to say he'd got the contract for Leeds, and she said she put the phone down, and somebody had once told her that some of your greatest moments will come when you're in bare feet. And she looked down, and she was in bare feet, and she gave my dad this hug, and she was saying how the youngest of her older 3 was flying, and the other 2 were on their way, and she had this feeling of like everybody's in a good place, they're moving in a good direction. So they were clearly good. Their relationship was good, and then obviously something like that happens. You have all these kind of people. If you look at the immediate nuclear family, the 5 of us left have different ways of coping, different ways of grieving, and nobody sits you down and says, right, this is going to be like an absolute mess, and everybody will be on a different page all the time. Everybody will be doing things to help themselves at different times, or maybe not help themselves, or maybe be destructive in their behaviors, or maybe find things that are certainly not healthy. And so everybody did just that, and my sister was living in actually she was modeling, and she was in Japan when it happened, and she moved off to live in America not long after that, and so she was kind of away from the rest of us. And then my parents did very different kind of things, went on very different paths in their way of dealing with it. And it wasn't very long before I think their relationship was just creaking massively, and their needs and their ability to support each other was just impossible, you know, because my dad had always been quite a big drinker, became a bigger drinker, and used alcohol a lot to numb his pain. And my mum went on much more of a voyage of discovery and reading and wanting to understand more about life, and whether that was ringing up a rabbi or going to church more or finding, you know, a support group or, you know, all these different things that she was doing. He was doing the kind of opposite and didn't want to open his mind or his heart to anything, because he didn't trust anything. And so I, as the eldest child, I was much more, I suppose at the beginning, I wanted to kind of make everything and everybody right and, you know, try and keep everybody going. And then when I went to university, I went on a kind of, right, let's just live for two lives. Let's go for it. And let's, you know, join every society, do all the sport, you know, do the degree, get a job in local radio, and just push it to the max. And you can't keep doing that, you know. About a year afterwards, my first year of exams in my summer, I kind of had a mini collapse, I think, and had to start facing up to grief.
Right. Okay. So you think that was when it properly hit you?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'd done enough running.
Yeah.
And I kind of realised when I couldn't sleep very well, I went to see a doctor and he just put me on sleeping tablets.
Yeah.
And I kind of instinctively knew that wasn't right. You know, I didn't want to start at 20 years old being somebody who needed sleeping tablets to get, because I'd seen what they'd done to my dad through he'd always had a problem with sleeping tablets through his life playing and stuff, because he'd had so many injuries and, you know, problems sleeping after games and things. And I thought, I don't want that to be me. And so actually my dad was the one who said, don't take sleeping tablets.
Yeah.
And I think slowly I realized I needed to speak to somebody. It took me, you know, a bit of time, but I was open to that, you know, to talking and trying to work through my grief in my way.
Yeah. And so did you find someone to speak to?
Yeah. The journey to find somebody came actually after I left university and I moved to London to work for Sky. And I met somebody who was put in charge of training presenters at Sky when I first joined. And I mentioned to him that I'd seen an acupuncturist, and I kind of was prone to getting quite bad skin. And he said, oh, you should see this woman. She's amazing. And she was a 5-element Chinese acupuncturist. But really what she did for me was not my skin at all. It was total kind of therapy, really. Yeah. And I started going every week to see her and realised that it was talking. She was using the needles, but we talked for the hour. I think what a really good therapist, for me, everybody's different, needed to do was open up the possibility of things in my mind that led me to understand things, rather than me deciding this was, no, it's because of this that I'm like this. Or,
absolutely.
You know. And so we had some brilliant conversations, and I got, I suppose, a better understanding of why I was behaving how I was, or how I had dealt with certain things. And I think I was starting to be quite self-destructive, and I didn't really want to carry on being like that. You know, I wasn't, didn't use drugs, and I wasn't a massive drinker, but I was kind of going out more and having a lifestyle that I didn't recognise. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And also not, I think it was more actually my choice of men as well was quite destructive, you know, and not choosing to be with people who were good for me at all. Yeah. You know, people that did not want the best for me.
Right.
And that was a weird kind of when I look back now, I think, why would I do that? But that's this person saying that.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, but the other person's in pain and trying to find something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you said about your, obviously your dad kind of, in a way, disassociate with it, would you say?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I think my dad was very much he was always slightly suspicious of life anyway, that life was definitely the half empty cup. Right. My mum would always say she was the very positive one, and he was more cynical about, things. He's a very emotional man, and he could be very open with his emotions, and always told us he loved us and was very demonstrative in that sense, but was always a bit cynical of people, and perhaps couldn't always kind of believe that people wanted the best, you know. Yeah. And so when my brother died, that was confirmation for him. Life was shit. And now I'm going to close down all the, all the shutters. I'm not letting anything else affect me like that. And so the person it had probably the biggest impact on was my little brother, because he was still living at home. And I think my dad felt so hurt and so broken that he just couldn't feel that he could love again in the same way and show himself and be so vulnerable. And so, I think my little brother Jordan was at home with my mum and dad going through all this, whereas we'd left home. We'd had our really happy, idyllic childhood. And of course, there's a certain amount of guilt in that as well, because you feel like you've had that, that grounding, because that grounding is everything, isn't it? And you can deal with a lot if you've had a good grounding. You can sort stuff out. But if the grounding is rocky, then it's hard to get back onto firm land, isn't it?
Absolutely. Like there's a guy that I love called Dr. Gabby Logan, and he talks about the first kind of formative 7 to 10 years of your life, and that kind of forms who you are as a person in a way, and if that's rocky, that can really kind of dictate what happens.